Today we discuss about the fiscal policy from 1946 to the present. Fiscal policy is the government adjusts its spending levels and tax rates to monitor and influence the nation's economy. We have two types of fiscal policy, the contractionary and expansionary policy. When we say expansionary policy, it occurs when the Congress acts to cut taxes, rates, or increase government spending, shifting the aggregate demands curve to the right, while the contractionary is fiscal policy occurs when Congress raises rates or cuts government spending, shifting aggregate and demand to the left. Both of these policies are intended to increase aggregate demand while contributing the deficits or drawing down budgets of surpluses. The impact of the War of the Philippines economy was effectively disparate as the Manila, the capital, was razed to the ground while the rest of the Philippines was relatively untouched. But the highly agriculture-based economy was disrupted. So, idineclared ng United States ang independency sa Philippines. However, the country needed rehabilitation funds from the United States. So, nagdependent gihapon ang Philippines sa Americans. So, take advantage gihapon sa mga Americans ang Philippines. President Manuel Rojas. When Manuel Rojas started his term as the first president of the Third Republic of the Philippines, the country was paralyzed because World War II just ended. The reconstruction of the post-war Philippines fell into the hands of Manuel Rojas. Philippines was severely struggling with low production, decreasing job availability, increasing unemployment rates, weak education system, and interference in the government sector by the American government. United States advised the adoption of direct taxation, but Manuel Rojas declined the proposal because it did not want to alienate the allies in Congress. President Elpidio Quirino. The momentum for economic growth during this time through the implementation for import and exchange controls that led to import substitution development. Import and exchange controls is the method of state intervention in the imports and exports of the country, so that the adverse balance of payment may be corrected. The import substitution development is a trade and economic policy which advocates replacing foreign imports with domestic production. Another is the corporate tax rates, is a tax imposed on the net income of the company. In his term also, there is a new taxes measure were also passed which included higher corporate tax rates that increased government revenues. The tax revenues increased twofold in 1953 compared to 1948. President Magsaysay, Garcia, and Macapagal, they promised to study the tax structure and policy of the country through the creation of a tax commission in 1959 by means of Republic Act No. 2211. The period of the post-war republic also saw a rise in corruption. The indirect taxation is a tax collected by an intermediary form from the person who bears the ultimate economic burden of the tax. When we say tax revenue, it is defined as the revenues collected from the taxes of income and profits, social security contribution, taxes levied in goods and services, payroll taxes, taxes on the ownership and transfer of property, and other taxes. In their term also, the collection of taxes remained poor. Tax structure were still problematic, and much of public funds were lost to corruption, which left the government incapable of funding projects geared towards development. President Ferdinand Marcos. The tax system was still heavily dependent on indirect taxes, which made up of 70% of total tax collection. The tax system also remained unresponsive. The taxes grow at an average of annual rate of 15% and generate a low tax yield. When we say tax effort, It is the ratio between the share of the actual tax collection in gross domestic product and predictable taxable capacity was at low of 10%, 10.7%. President Corazon Aquino reformed the tax system through the 1986 Tax Reform Program. When we say 1986 Tax Reform Program, it aims to simplify the tax system, make revenues more responsive to economic activity, promote horizontal equity, and promote growth by correcting existing taxes. Her term also, along with tax reform, came the administrative reform such as the reconstructing of Department of Finance and the BIR through the Executive Order 127. Collection and tax audits were intensified, computerization was introduced, and corruption was relatively reduced. Both tax and revenue effort rose, increasing from 10.7% in 1985 to 15.4% in 1992. A major reform in the tax system introduced under the term of Aquino was the introduction of the Value-Added Tax, or VAT. The VAT law was signed in 1986 and put to effect in 1988. While it was a reliable source of revenue for the government, new taxes laws would reduce its reliability as the legislative exemption grew. President Joseph Estrada in his term was too short to constitute any changes in tax system. So no changes in tax system. President Gloria Arroyo, she undertook increased government spending without adjusting tax collection. This resulted in large deficit from 2002 to 2004. Expanded Value Added Tax or EVAT signed into law as Republic Act 9337 expanded the VAT base, taxed selected professional services, and VAT tax rate was also increased from 10% to 12%. President Benigno Aquino, this administration ventured into the adjustment of excise tax on liquor and cigarettes or the sin tax reform, which when we say sin tax reform, it is primarily a health measure with revenue implication, but more fundamentally, it helps finance the universal health care program of the government, simplified the current exercise tax system on alcohol and tobacco products. President Rodrigo Duterte, he promised tax reform, particularly in income taxes as it vowed to lower income tax rates shouldered by working Filipinos. The proposed tax reform seeks to limit VAT exemption and increased excise taxes on petroleum products and automobiles. The present income tax scheme of the country is the second highest in the Southeast Asia, and the current laws on income taxes were outdated as they were drafted 2 decades ago. President Fidel Ramos, this administration ventured into its own tax reform program in 1997 through the Comprehensive Tax Reform Program. Comprehensive tax reform implemented to make the tax system broad-based, simple, and with simple and reasonable tax rates, minimize the tax avoidance allowed by existing loopholes in the system, encouraging payments by increasing tax exemption levels, lowering the higher tax rates, simplifying procedure, and rationalize the grant of tax incentives. The VAT base was also broadened in 1997 to include services through Republic Act 7716. The features of the improved VAT laws were as follow. First, restored the VAT exemption for all cooperatives like agriculture, electric credit, or multipurpose and other, provided that the share capital of each member does not exceed 15,000. Second, expanded the coverage of the term simple processes by including broiling and roasting effectively, narrowing the tax base for fixed products. Third, expanded the coverage of the term original state by including molasses. Fourth are the exempted from the value-added tax or VAT. The first is importation of meat. Second, sale or importation of coal and natural gases in whatever form or state. Third is educational services rendered by private educational institution duly accredited by the Commission on Higher Education or CHED. And fourth is the house and lot other residential dwellings valued at 1 million and below, subject to adjustment using the Consumer Price Index or CPI. These data gives information how the Philippine tax policy evolved by the past few years, and every administration has its own policy how to increase the revenue of the country. That's all, thank you.